better should have been high-level panels and no one they I'm one of the organizers.
So I'm Shanaz Musa, a director at a not-for-profit called South North, and we're based in the Global South, where the issue of adaptation is an unfolding crisis. Often we are faced with grassroots communities that are reacting to what's happening without the ability to respond because of the lack of finance that's flowing to the grassroots level for these responses. And I'd like to just make that distinction between reacting and responding. And possibly, I think a lot of that will come out during the panel discussions as well. So the intention of today's session, which is a high-level roundtable, there's nothing around and there are some small round tables, but the intention is to build some sort of momentum around the scale and I think scale as in big, so the ambition and as well as the quality of the climate finance, and take this to the COP29 so that what comes out of COP results in real, tangible actions on the ground for communities most impacted. So the session today will, the way it will flow is we're going to have two high-level presentations. We'll then have two panels. The people on the panel will be prompted by questions, but I'd also like to somehow get the audience involved. So I'm going to see how that unfolds. And hopefully we all behave ourselves so that it goes, it doesn't end up a disaster. So our first speaker, or the first introductory keynote, will be by the Honorable Almadine Mediev. And if I can welcome you onto would you like to stand at the podium or will you be sitting? Yeah, right. So I just want to give you some background to the Honorable Almadine. So Almadine currently serves as the finance team lead and senior negotiator of the incoming COP29 presidency. He is a career diplomat with 15 years of management experience, including in international organizations. Throughout this period, he has supervised and coordinated implementation of different types of international projects, mostly pertaining to development, capacity building, sustainability, and youth and women empowerment. Since 2021, he has been leading the Azerbaijan International Development Agency with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Azerbaijan. The agency acts as a national donor institution of Azerbaijan and realizes humanitarian and development assistance projects and activities in a vast geography. We are deeply grateful that the Honorable Almadine has made his time to be here with us today to open this very important event. Almadine, over to you.
Yeah.
And there's about 5 minutes, so I'll be waving my hands here.
Okay, but anyway, I will finish my speech. Yeah, Dr. Shana, thank you very much. It's really great pleasure to be here, and good morning, everybody. Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to join you for this pivotal discussion on scaling up adaptation finance and action at COP29. I'm also delighted to be here in New York today, engaging in insightful discussions and panels that emphasize the critical need to enhance adaptation finance. Let me start by thanking Dan Church Aid, South North, UN Foundation, E3G, and German Watch for organizing today's roundtable and for the invitation. The year 2024 is set to be the hottest year on record, and recent events have brought the reality of climate change into sharp focus. Besides the science, we also hear the calls from parties that we need to significantly increase our actions dedicated to adaptation. At COP29, we aim to significantly advance global cooperation on climate adaptation. First, it's clear that we must breach the adaptation finance gap. The global stocktake has made it evident that adaptation finance must increase substantially far beyond the doubling agreed upon at COP26. On that note, we are awaiting the report by developed countries on adaptation finance. With sound methodology and data illustrating substantial increases in financial flows, this report could mark the first step toward meaningful adaptation results at COP29. As COP29 presidency, we are committed to raising ambition for adaptation finance and are calling for contributions to funds, including the Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund. The presidency recognizes the need to scale up adaptation finance in alignment with delivering an ambitious, transparent, and fair new collective quantified goal. This alignment must also reflect the global goal on adaptation, the adaptation goal of the Paris Agreement, and the NCQG. Reaching an agreement on a fair and ambitious NCQG is essential for a successful COP29. We are collaborating with parties to ensure the new goal reflects the urgency and scale of the challenge. This includes recognizing adaptation as a distinctive objective from mitigation and grounding it in the best available science while addressing the specific needs of developing countries. We are committed to supporting parties in finding the space needed to address these issues and identify solutions throughout the entire negotiation process. It was an honor to host the last technical expert dialogue and the final ad hoc work program meeting on the NCQG in Baku, where we witnessed insightful discussions from parties. We will continue to create opportunities for high-level engagement as we move towards COP29. Likewise, we are committed to progress and resolving outstanding matters under Article 6 to enable higher ambition for countries in their mitigation and adaptation action through countries' cooperation. Second, we recognize that effective adaptation depends not only on finance, but also on solid plans, strategies, and technical capacity, namely concrete action. In response to the global stocktake, we all need to have national adaptation plans, policies, and planning process in place by 2025 and ensure their implementation by 2030. It will be essential to extend the relevant support to those countries in need to prepare their NAPs in a timely manner. We commend efforts demonstrated so far to this end and would like to acknowledge the GCF's initiative to provide resources to the countries directly for this purpose. While Azerbaijan is also working on its NAP, we are encouraging parties to submit their NAPs on time. We recognize this as an iterative process and will continue to be in dialogue with parties on how we can further assist them in preparation. At the same time, the Presidency is committed to supporting the UAE Belém work program in developing indicators to measure progress on adaptation targets and to achieve early progress on the indicators for the global goal of adaptation framework. We also want to emphasize that finance is vital to supporting the implementation of the United Arab Emirates framework for global climate resilience. This is especially crucial for meeting targets, particularly in relation to the implementation efforts of developing country parties. However, as we near the midway point, the UAE Belém work program has not made sufficient progress in developing and mapping high-quality adaptation indicators. Experts have been convened to refine the initial mapping a process set to unfold in the coming days. Despite this technical progress, discussions at the SP60 meetings in Bonn emphasized the need for political momentum to bridge divergences, accelerate implementation, and scale up adaptation finance. As the COP29 incoming presidency attaches great importance to the matters related with adaptation on the agenda of the upcoming COP, we are planning to nominate a dedicated ministerial pair for informal consultations on adaptation with a view of supporting these efforts. I believe this will help us to ensure the necessary level political engagement to address the issue and keep as a priority on the agenda. Let's use today's discussion to build momentum, foster dialogue, and strengthen trust on adaptation finance and action for a successful outcome at COP29. Over the coming weeks, leading up to COP29, we will provide space to advance adaptation matters at the high-level ministerial dialogue on the NCQG, the heads of delegation meetings in October, and pre-COP. But while we are in New York, I would like to invite you all to take part in the COP29 incoming presidency's event, namely Road to COP29, a multilateral approach to climate adaptation, to be held on 26 September at 1 p.m., between 1 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. in the UN headquarters, ECOSOC Chamber Hall. Finally, taking this opportunity, on behalf of the COP29 presidency, I warmly invite all of you to join us in Baku for COP29. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Almadine. I'm really excited to actually hear the commitment, not just to increasing finance, but to also ensuring that it leads to action. So thank you for that, Almadine. The next keynote is by His Royal Highness Prince Jaime de Bourbon de Parme. He's, I almost got it right. Yeah. His Royal Highness is the climate envoy of the Netherlands. He has an extensive diplomatic career in forging partnerships for innovative solutions to complex global challenges. Some of this experience includes being the senior advisor on private sector partnerships at the United Nations Refugee Agency, ambassador of the Netherlands to the Holy See, which is the Vatican, special envoy for natural resources among member of the Cabinet of the European Commission for Competition, among many other roles. Thankfully, we don't have all the other roles here. Otherwise, throughout his career, His Royal Highness has made it a priority to promote global collaboration to accelerate climate action and address the impacts of environmental challenges. We are deeply honored to have you here today. And over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doctor. And it's really good to be with all of you. I didn't realize it would be such a nice social gathering. I meet ministers, ambassadors, knowledge institutions, a lot of partners where we worked in the last 3 years as climate envoy and before. So it's good to be here with you. Why the Netherlands? Why have they asked me? I have no real idea, but maybe it's because a third of our country is below the sea level. And we've been adapting. We're actually winning land from the sea, so we've been adapting and pushing water away. So I guess sea level rise is an existential threat to our country. Actually, my family, my wife and my 2 daughters are right now in my house, which is below the sea level. 55% of our population lives in that area, and about more or less the same percentage of our economy is in the low-lying areas of the Netherlands. So we've learned how to adapt, and we're sharing that knowledge globally. Many of your countries were active on water management issues, but also if we extend adaptation, we also focus very much more and more on food systems. How do we adapt food systems to climate change? We do a lot of research on drought-resistant crops. We do research on salinite, if you use salt water for agriculture, etc. So these are the 2 areas on adaptation that we're keep on focusing going forward. Now, the UN Adaptation Gap Report indicates that adaptation finance gap is widening, and that is really frightful and very alarming. Even so, there's some little nuances that we need to bring to that. The OECD report that came out this year showed that developed countries mobilized a total of 32.4 billion in adaptation finance in 2022, which is a record high and an increase of 31% over 2021 levels. But I must say that adaptation finance is erratic. So you can have 1 year, you've got a spike, and next year you can see it go down. So what we're looking for is stable sources of finance. And let me just highlight one stable source of finance, which has been the EU and some of its member states. Now, ODI report published this year indicated that 12 countries around the world deliver their fair share on adaptation finance, and many of these countries are based in the EU. And let me explain you why. The EU is the world's leading contributor in development assistance. The EU is the world's biggest climate finance contributor, providing at least a third of the world's public climate finance. Almost 40% of the EU's climate finance contribution is focused on adaptation. So the EU is on track, and I really would like to urge you to see us as your partner. And as for the Netherlands, one of the member states of the EU, more than 50% of our climate finance is now adaptation, and all of our climate finance, mitigation, adaptation, is grant-based. So how can we raise ambition on adaptation globally? On quantity, we all know which countries can do more, and we jointly need to urge them to up their contributions to adaptation finance. Also on quantity, we need to look for other sources of finance and innovative solutions to address the needs. And it sounds like an empty phrase, but actually we've been working with a new mechanism we're going to launch at the COP29 with Azerbaijan, which is the ILX fund. And ILX fund is a fund that invests money from our pension funds. The Netherlands is amongst the biggest pension funds in the world. $1 billion now invested through MDBs in climate-related projects around the world. And it has a good return of investment. Now, the pension funds didn't know how to invest in the Global South. And MDBs know how to do that, multilateral development banks. So this fund bridges the two divides between the worlds, and the MDBs didn't know how to present projects so the private sector could invest in them. So this fund does it. $1 billion immediately within a year found their targets in projects. We're now seeing if we can increase it, and we're talking to pension funds around the world to contribute to this or similar sort of funds. Another example is the African Risk Capacity, which is an African initiative and now the biggest provider of insurance against climate-related risks such as droughts. And this attracts funds from reinsurance to adaptation. So these are two examples, and we encourage you to share your other examples how we can leverage private sector funds to move into adaptation as new sources of finance. And third, we need to double down on access. We heard it also in the introductions. We need access to finance, and we need that to push it through the entire financial infrastructure, i.e. through harmonization and simplification of procedures, as well as capacity building. And I've seen some board members of the Green Climate Fund and other funds, and we really need to push that forward. But we also need to create alliances with other ministers that normally don't focus on climate, for instance, finance ministers. Now, the Netherlands, together with Indonesia, are the co-chairs of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. And the finance ministers also have an important role to play because they've got the tools to address climate risks and adjust economic, fiscal, and financial policies, whereby creating climate-resilient economies. And we can all, the finance ministers, are learning from each other and also focusing on adaptation issues. And lastly, we need to focus on access to the most vulnerable, and particularly SIDS and LDCs. And the Netherlands and Europe, but many other countries around the world here, are really pushing to have clear criteria that those that need it most have most access to funding. And it's quite extraordinary in the negotiations that their voice is not heard within their own constituency. So it's often the middle-income countries pushing the SIDS and LDCs in the corner on vulnerability criteria. So that's worrisome to me. Now, in conclusion, we need to scale up finance where possible from all sources. We need to prioritize existing funding to the most vulnerable and to increase access, and we need to scale up innovative solutions going forward and integrate all different ministers, including finance ministers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I ask you, you've got one of my pages. Yeah,
Love take over.
the last one.
There we go.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So again, it really is heartening to hear what's happening particularly from the Dutch perspective. And as an organization, I mean, we're based in Cape Town, South Africa, and we're very aware of the role that particularly the Dutch government is playing as a champion of local-led adaptation. And for that, I think we also truly grateful, because pushing that agenda wherever it is possible. So thank you to our keynote speakers. And so we're going to move on now to our two panels. So the structure is we'll have one panel and then another panel. So the first panel, I'm going to ask that the panelists join us on the stage, and the first person I'd like to invite is Ambassador Janine Felsen-Belize, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Belize to the United Nations. Thank you. And then the next person is Mr. Trig Talley, MD for Climate Negotiations and Programs, Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, the U.S. State Department. And then there's been a slight change. So from Malawi, we have Dr. Yusuf Nkongula, who is the Principal Secretary for the Ministry of Natural Resources and Climate Change. Thank you, sir. We then have the Honorable Lotte Mahon, State Secretary for Development Policy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Denmark. And then the Honorable Vosita Vuyenayeke, Technical Lead, Office of the G77 and China Chair. Thank you. Welcome. So the way we're going to run the panel is that I'll pose a question to each of the panelists. And I'm going to just check I've got my order correct here. Or have you got my page? Thank you. And then you'll each have about 5 minutes to respond. And so I ask that you kindly keep to that, because I'd like to get 1 or 2 comments or questions from the audience, because I think it's important to hear what people are, what's coming up for people as they listen to what's being said. So I'm going to be starting off with Ambassador Janine, if that's, are you fine with that? Thank you. Yeah. So, from the perspective of highly vulnerable states, what do you want to see in an agreement on a new collective quantified goal for climate finance regarding adaptation finance? And how can some of the issues with adaptation finance that have been raised be addressed in an agreement on the new collective quantifiable goal for climate finance? We'll pass it down. Oh, okay, she got one. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to our distinguished speakers, and thank you to the organizers for this event. I have 4 main points, and I'm probably not going to be able to look at my phone together, so this will all be recollection. It's part passion, part technicality, and part solemnity. In the first instance, I think it's really important that we recognize that this goal is being designed in the context of the Paris Agreement. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because it means that it has to deliver on those objectives that we set out in the Paris Agreement. 1.5, resilience and systemic shifts. That's important. And that has to be done in the context of sustainable development. That's another very critical point. And I think we tend to miss that framing because we start looking at issues really related to investment, which I know is a very important topic. But when we focus on that solely, we turn the Paris Agreement on its head, because the Paris Agreement was designed and intended to bend towards the public good, not private profits. And when we start focusing strictly on investment, then we start to lose what our objectives are. And I think that's the first thing that we need to recognize. We do not need to recreate a 2-decade-old experiment that has failed in the finance and development sector. In that space, we have focused on investment, return on risk, profit, and who has been left behind. If you look at the most recent SDG report, it's the SIDS and the LDCs. We are left behind and we're left in debt. So the first point I want to make is that we need to change the framing of our discussion. We need to focus less on risk-based finance and more on equity-based finance. And when we talk about adaptation, we need to talk about people. Second, private sector. And thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, for identifying a way in which private sector might be able to deliver on finance. From a small island developing state perspective, it has not yet delivered. We pay the insurance premiums. We pay the guarantees to have private sector come into our countries. That is part of the reason why we have a debt crisis. In 40 or so of our countries are in debt distress. Across many, 40% are in debt distress. That is concern. So if we are to invest in the private sector, we are to invest in the private sector in our countries to help them move towards more leveraging. Potentially that is an option. But for the purposes of the goal, what do we need? We do need a layered approach, but my layered approach is not the layered approach that you're very familiar with. My layered approach is based strictly on the objectives of the Paris Agreement: mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage. And on adaptation, what we need to focus on clearly is on expanding the public support for adaptation, especially in vulnerable countries, because they need a hand up now, not tomorrow, not in 10 years. And what does that look like? So we already heard the more recently quoted figure on adaptation, 32 billion. Well, we can't just say we need a target for adaptation that balances adaptation and mitigation. That hasn't worked. 32 billion is not what we need. 10 to 18 times less than what we need. So we probably are going to be looking at doubling adaptation every year for the next 5 years. And that's to even increase additionality for loss and damage. Thank you. My last point is on the access and concessionality. I don't think we can escape the fact that it's not going to be easy for any SIDS or LDC to make a case. Poster children of credit risk make a case for investment. And it's been already documented that it is feasible to help SIDS and LDCs through greater development, public sector financing, because in the end, there's a long-term investment that comes with investing in SIDS. SIDS control some 30% of the world's ocean, some of the most unique biodiversity. So when you invest in us, you're investing in a long-term public good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Ambassador Janine. I think it's, and also just for all of us, the reminder of how at the heart of it, adaptation finance is about people and about justice. So just, getting back to that. The next panelist, Trig Talley, my prompt to you is, how is the US taking steps to scale up adaptation finance globally? In particular, how is it working to improve mobilization, effectiveness, and make sure that finance is getting to what is most needed?
Well, thanks. And it's nice to see some old friends here, and also this group of deeply expert folks. So in response to the question, just to say that under this administration, when we came in under the the leadership of Christina Chan, we focused very much on how we could be more effective and strategic in addressing adaptation. And during the Obama administration, a lot of resources were spent towards adaptation, but we didn't step back and say, how can we most effectively make use of our resources so that others could make use of their resources? And we established the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or PREPARE, which was inspired by maybe our most successful example of an assistance intervention for AIDS. That effort, PREPARE, has two components. One is a quantitative goal, which was to increase our adaptation support to $3 billion, which I know is nowhere near what we need, but in the context of our national budget is actually a pretty big envelope and would represent a six-fold increase. We're on track to do that by 2024, so that's good. But just as importantly, what we tried to do was to effectively harness the really unique strengths that we as a government have. We have NASA, we have NOAA, who provide enormous capabilities for data around the world. And we have AID and our embassies, which have a presence that probably is unique in its reach. So there's a strategic component of this that was designed to try to make use of their resources by integrating our actions deeply into what we do across our development portfolio, and also engaging countries around the world. And I think we are having a great effect on that. The aim of PREPARE has been to help 500 million people in developing countries adopt and manage impacts. And we are aiming, and I believe we have already had interventions in some 80 countries for early warning and 75 countries for support for national adaptation plans. And that's the heart of PREPARE. Let me just talk about a couple of examples of what we're working on. And by the way, I should say that we have really prioritized SIDS and LDCs in our work. So in some cases, that has meant providing support to regional and local activities there. Most recently, the Pacific Resilience Facility, where we announced a $20 million grant to that organization a couple of weeks ago. But we've also been working with the MDBs to work on issues like debt, which we deeply understand is a major problem for countries. But let me just highlight a couple of examples. One is that we think that the integration action will be vastly enhanced the extent to which we are engaging finance ministries. So we've been very strong supporters of the Resilience and Adaptation Mainstreaming Program, where we're working with ministries of finance across Africa and the Caribbean to get adaptation into national budgets. And we're working with local universities to build capacity among finance people to be focused on resilience and sustainability. And we're working through major networks as well, like the Global Adaptation, the NAPS Global Network, to do this kind of work. Second, and then let me give one more example, which does relate to engaging the private sector, because we have seen that as a major way to leverage finance. In 2022, the State Department and AID launched the PREPARE call to action to the private sector. We have 38 major companies like Google, McCormick, and others with specific responses to invest in climate resilience. And we've also prioritized getting adaptation into our development finance portfolio through the Development Finance Corporation. And they now have a goal of 517 million in support through development finance by 2027, and an additional 500 million by 2030. And that is supporting the expansion of parametric insurance for drought funding and hurricanes and other types of activities. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I think it also links back to this breaking down of silos and around the data and working across ministries. So yeah, so thank you for that. Dr. Yusuf, your prompt or your question is, the climate crisis is already a reality in the LDC countries. Wait, yeah, that's, I think that's just... So, developed countries double. Your mic. Oh, no, it's working. Developed countries have promised to double adaptation. What do you expect from this promise? And what outcome can COP29 deliver to ensure more adaptation finance is delivered? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think let me appreciate the audience. I think this is a very important discussion because we're talking of adaptation finance, which is part of climate finance. And I think adaptation finance is also very important for us as LDCs. So Malawi, being the chair of LDCs, is representing the needs of all the 45 countries in terms of how we can access climate finance. And I think LDCs are actually feeling the pinch or the impact of climate finance. To give an example, a perspective is that in the just ended agricultural season for Malawi, or rainy season for Malawi from 2023 to 2024, we experienced what we call a Nino situation, where in some instances or some areas we actually did not have even a drop of rain. So our farmers were affected. So about 9 million people in Malawi were affected. And this meant that there were no harvests, and therefore this resulted into hunger. And this situation, I think, was prevalent in most parts of the Southern Africa. And therefore, this shows the significance of how we need adaptation finance for population to adapt and probably improve their resilience. And therefore, we feel it is important for LDCs to access adaptation finance because it safeguards livelihood and supports the availability of food, water, and of course, health care, and in fact, ensuring that we have resilient infrastructure in all those aspects. So we believe COP29 is very important. It's an opportunity for us to demonstrate that the promises that were made by developed countries are delivered on time. And of course, delivered in full, because promises are promises. They can be kept or they can be broken. And I think that is actually what is happening, because developed countries are not fulfilling those promises. So as LDCs, we're saying we actually have to make sure that that doubling of adaptation finance is met as a promise by 2025. And for us, I think we cannot further wait for any promises, but probably deliver the promises that have been made. So doubling adaptation finance will not suffice, but increased adaptation finance is of essence. I think COP29 should also prioritize robust linkages between new collective quantified goal and global goal and adaptation framework, because these are two important tools that can guide implementation of various initiatives. But what is important is adaptation finance. And we're looking at the Paris Agreement's ambition for adaptation, which hinges on the 11 global goal and adaptation framework targets, because it also provides some action for achieving global climate resilience, and of course, safeguarding most vulnerable populations. So as LDCs, you're already aware that we have a total population of more than 1 billion people, which means many people are affected by climate change impacts. Yet we only contribute to less than 4% of the world greenhouse gas emissions. And when we look at adaptation finance, we only receive 18% of the total global adaptation finance. And this is a challenge. It means we have a big gap in terms of fulfilling our promises that we made as developed countries. So just to reiterate that with the current situation, LDCs receive less than half of the 40 billion per year for adaptation that we require. And this is a huge gap, as I already indicated, and therefore we urge the developed countries to fulfill the promises and work together with the LDCs to ensure that we achieve our global goal on adaptation. And then, of course, LDCs should also be responsible and become accountable to what they do. It's not only about asking for achievement or fulfillment of the promise, and therefore we are also looking at ensuring that we're acting as adaptation leaders, because that's our mandate, to ensure that we implement actions towards the resources that are available through adaptation finance. And this is why, as LDCs, we're developing the National Adaptation Plan that will determine adaptation priorities and have a clear vision for all the LDCs to be developing climate resilience pathways by 2030. So I think it's an opportunity for us to make sure that the finance is available, and that COP29 must deliver on these two issues, more especially on your collective quantified goal that will provide for a quantum for LDCs in terms of what will be provided maybe for the next 5 years, maybe by 2030. And of course, also looking at the global goal and adaptation. So it is important for all of us to work together and collaborate and coordinate for us to ensure that there's that doubling of adaptation finance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Yusuf. And also thank you for that stark reminder about the impacts of climate change. So to you, Honorable Lotte Mahon, the prompt or question is, what lessons have contributor countries learned from the commitment to double adaptation finance, and how can these lessons be applied to ensure adequate levels and quality of adaptation finance moving forward?
Thank you so much for that question, and thanks to fellow speakers and for the organizers for the event today. It's surely very important, and climate adaptation is a key Danish priority and has been so for very long. The COP26 goal of doubling climate adaptation has been met by Denmark already. We're increasing further on. We know, as the global stocktake last year made clear, that we have on target much more is needed. It was already alluded to by my Belize colleagues that we need 10 to 18 times more on climate adaptation. And how do we get there? I think 3 lessons that I want to try to be brief and stick to my time. So the first lesson that is a guiding principle for us is to work much more in partnership. We all know that ODA is not enough. We need to crowd in the private sector. We have launched an Investment Mobilization Collaboration Alliance. It's called IMCA, together with the US, among others, to try actually to make the business case for adaptation. We know it's easier to get the private sector to work on mitigation projects, but here we are making a case, a real business case for adaptation. It's working well, but the real test, of course, will be whether there are mature projects in country. And here, that's my second lesson. We need to work much more on country-led adaptation projects. And this is very much about sort of, I think sometimes we get stuck on focusing on the quantity of finance. We have all these quantifiable goals, but what about the quality? And we really need quality. and we need to use it efficiently and effectively. And here we need to put the countries in question center stage and make sure that they are leading the process. So when we talk about partnership for mobilization, we also need partnership for implementation, but with the countries in lead. And here, and there's several Danish civil society organizations part of this, including the organizers and their international and local civil society. They are part and parcel of delivering on the ground to have this localized approach. And then finally, and that's the third lesson, access to finance. I mean, the whole international climate finance system is so complex, it's fragmented, and it poses a very high transaction cost on the countries that are trying to access it, often with very limited capacity. It really falls back on us. I mean, there's so many funds sitting in the climate funds, and it's not out there working. So how do we do that? We need to simplify access, accelerate timelines, make sure that there's support for accreditation and use of harmonized applications, and also working on capacity building. So that's some of the lessons that are guiding us in our efforts as we work on adaptation. As I said, we've already doubled our climate finances for adaptation. In fact, we have a 60% goal of every climate finance that we have that should be to adaptation. And we're very pleased that the COP29 presidency are working so hard on the new goal. We need a fair, ambitious, and realistic new goal, and Denmark is happy and very committed to try to deliver that at COP29 in just a few months. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you also for the reminder to be realistic. I think, yeah, and to. So the Honourable Rosita Vayanayake, your question is, the G77 plus China is a very diverse group of developing countries with diverse needs. How will the group ensure COP29 yields a positive outcome for adaptation for all developing countries?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And just was it not honorable, so thank you. Yeah, so as we all know, G77 China is a large group. It's 134 countries. The needs of developing countries are similar and also different. And we do take into consideration the special needs. We go by the mandate of the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC. But we also need to work together as 134 countries if we are to be ambitious to achieve collective outcomes at COP29. So this is a work which takes a lot of time and effort, but that does not mean that we're leaving anyone behind. So that's the first thing. We take everyone's voice into consideration, the priorities into consideration, and the evolving needs and priorities, especially looking at NCQG and the finance needs that we have. Adaptation has always been a priority for developing countries, for G77 and China, and this is on the top of our list. We work with all subgroups, all members, to ensure that what G77 puts forth as our position is a collective one, which is agreed collectively. Convergence is led, and we are working on finding many ways of how convergence could be enhanced. So, I mean, there were several comments made about different things, but what I'm trying to say is it's a work that takes a lot of effort, and the expectation is that we don't leave anyone from the group behind, and we ensure that means of implementation that's needed on the ground is provided for those that are needed. The needs of the vulnerable are addressed, and also access to finance is ensured. There are a lot of issues that we deal with at COP29. Very grateful for COP29 presidency for all the effort that they're taking to ensure that we are prepared and inclusive processes are in place, and all the discussions that are happening. We've been part of the HOD meetings, as well as the others will be coming and engaging effectively. So looking at how the agenda could be set in a balanced manner to ensure that adaptation is a priority, looking at agenda items such as GGA interlinks with how climate finance could be provided for adaptation, looking at inclusive and transparent processes that are important. These would be things that would be priorities for us. Looking at climate finance, I think this is something we're looking at as COP29 as a priority. You would have seen that G77 has engaged very actively during the TEDs and the meetings that have been happening. While we've been certain amount of generic in our statements, it doesn't mean that we are not having positions. So the positions that we're highlighting is that the mandate needs to be under the Paris Agreement, under the UNFCCC, and the contributor base and the developed countries need to be supporting the developing countries in provision of finance, and also the access being available in a manner with a defined climate finance definition, which would have adaptation as a core component. I think I'm within my time, but I think I've answered the question, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think what you very nicely highlighted is also that the work of, in this adaptation finance space, the work of inclusivity and equity is intense and it's patient work. So thank you for highlighting that. I just want to check my time with my timekeepers. That's your question. Okay. So is whoever is, yeah. Okay. So I'd like to open to the audience to, if there's anything, maybe not even questions, but even reflections on what you heard. And if it is reflections, is it something that moves this conversation forward? There's, okay, there, and then there's one hand at the back. And then that's, I think, okay, we'll see how we go for time. Yeah. Thank you, Anna. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. My name is Thomas Asari. I'm the Assistant Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization. I've helped the panelists. I think one thing that is concerning to me is the climate finance justice. I think if climate has no boundary, the cause of climate has no boundary, and the impact of climate has no boundary. If it was, I think the seeds and the LDCs will have had no problem because their contribution to its effect is minimal. But because it knows no boundaries, they have had to really consistently being asked to look at their own national contribution in terms of financing to address the climate issue. We cannot have countries that are having debt sustainability issues. The impact of even interest rate that these countries are paying on their national debts because of convertible currency issue impact alone, the amount they pay had already doubled, not because of economic fundamentals, let alone they are paying a perception premium because of rating agency downgrading these countries. So that is not sustainable for them. And we cannot really have a just discussion on climate finance without the finance ministers being there, because it is trying time to be a finance minister in those countries at this point in time. So we have to move away from the rhetoric climate finance issue and ask the question, the so-called billion rhetorics, where are they? Where can we find them? We cannot ask countries that are having this debt issue without countries are giving them grant. Same creditor nations are asking them to pay for the interest. So I think it's contradictory, and I think we need to have a just and equitable discussion on the climate finance.
Thanks.
Yeah, let's take the couple more. Yeah. If you could, yeah. Keep it sharp and question format.
Thank you, Nicola Ranger from the University of Oxford. So I wanted to bring in another perspective as well on finance that lies outside of the definition of adaptation, but actually has a massive impact on adaptation around the world. And I think this requires significantly more attention. So, for example, last year I worked with the European Commission as part of an expert group where we looked at the current development finance architecture around the world that's financing investment in infrastructure and agriculture. We found extremely little that even considered adaptation. So there's a huge opportunity to look at how do we make sure this existing DFI architecture, which is already pumping billions into investment in emerging and developing countries, is actually working for adaptation, because right now it isn't. Similarly, on the private sector side, if we look at, say, the 2.9 trillion a year that's going into infrastructure, very little of that is resilient. So I think in addition to the discussions on sort of mobilizing sort of tagged adaptation finance, we really need to fix the wider system and make sure that's working for adaptation so that developing countries can benefit from that.
And we'll take one last and then the panelists can answer. Thank you so much. Sandra Guzman from the Climate Finance Group for Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, there is a recognition that doubling adaptation finance is not enough. So, and there is also an observation that the NCQG can be a huge opportunity to raise or to increase the ambition on the adaptation gap. In your point of view, what's the best way to reflect this gap in the NCQG to really increase ambition? Probably 50-50 is never going to be enough because the gap is huge. So I would like to hear what is your proposal in terms of what is the best way to include this gap and ambitions in the NCQG. I would love to hear from everyone, particularly from the US and Denmark. Thank you.
Right.
What I think that's all I have on. Thank you. I think we're out of time, so if they could answer. Yeah.
It's on.
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think that so we actually have in the agreement, a call to try to make sure that adaptation gets requisite support, and I think we have been working to try to make certainly. I think we're at around 50% of our grant finance being adaptation. Now, the challenge is that a lot of our portfolio is trying to leverage development finance, and so far it's been easier to do on the emissions side than adaptation. But this is an area, as I mentioned in my remarks up front, where we are devoting a lot of active attention to try to change that. I think we have not wanted a specific, percentage put in because it just makes it more difficult for us to manage the different aspects of our budget. And I would say, certainly from the U.S. perspective, what we agree to is very much a stretch goal. And that's really important because we have to be opportunistic in how we achieve it. So we're always looking for opportunities to stretch our dollars, and that's how we meet stretch goals. So I don't think there's a specific formula. If we had specific formulas, we'd probably be more conservative in what we could agree to. But that does not mean that we don't have attention on adaptation. And I think we're making a lot of progress in equalizing the numbers as they're coming out, not just on the grant side, but beyond. Thanks.
Thank you so much for very good reflections and questions in the end. Just to say that sort of from our perspective, I mean, adaptation is key in that. As I said, we've put a 60% goal of all climate finances that we have for adaptation to, again, use it as a stretch goal, so to say, that and try to crowd in also the private sector here. I think it's important to mention that I completely agree with you who say that we cannot solve climate or climate finances in isolation. It's tied into the wider reform of the international financial architecture, the work that we do with the multilateral development banks, and in fact the whole ecosystem around that. And here it's a clear goal for us, and I know it is also for the president of the World Bank, to increase climate finances, also with a view for adaptation. And when it comes to the DFIs, again, I agree, it's a good perspective that we need to sort of mainstream climate adaptation across from the very concrete bidding process and put it in there. Thank you.
Thank you for really a great reflections and discussion. So I think a round of applause for the panel. And then yeah, time's up. Yes. And then I'd like to invite our next high-level panel, where we'll be talking to approaches to closing the adaptation financing gap. And the first person I'd like to invite is the Honorable Eamon Ryan, Minister for Environment, Climate and Communication, and Minister for Transport from Ireland. Thank you. And then the next person is the Honorable Tule Sule, Cedric Posey Selese Schuster, the Minister of Natural Resources and Environmental and Land, Samoa. I'm not sure if Ali is here. No. No, it doesn't look. And then Mr. Alessandro Guerri, DG for International and European Affairs, Ministry for the Environment and Energy Security, Italy. Welcome. So the format will be similar to the last one, and I'll start on the right with the Honorable Eamon Ryan. So the question to you is, Ireland has long been an adaptation finance champion. Looking beyond COP29, how can leaders such as Ireland deliver the greater ambition needed to close the adaptation ambition gap and safeguard the 1.25 agenda? And then also specifically, what will Ireland do?
Well, good morning, everyone. Be on the spot. And I'm reflecting on what I've just heard in the first panel as much as anything else. Some of the principles as to what Ireland will do, or how we see this issue, how we approach it. Firstly, and I met someone coming in, a lady who worked with the Ministry for the Environment in Maldives with Amanat Shona's team. And that just reminded me, back in Sharm el-Sheikh in the negotiations there, they put forward, as I recall, this image of a mosaic of financing solutions. And I like the mosaic image. I know we have to talk about onions and layers, but the mosaic paints a picture. And the mosaic gives the possibility, and we all, in all our cultures, have that wall painting, mosaic. Different forms. I suppose it was from the Arab world where you were thinking about in Sharm el-Sheikh. But, and the mosaic, first of all, when it comes to the finance, is recognizing there are so many. Even the lady from Oxford just added one piece of the mosaic where she said the money we're spending in agriculture and in infrastructure, that's finance that we can shift towards adaptation. The whole range, Article 6, public finance, absolutely. But aviation levies, maritime levies, carbon tax, billionaires tax, private blended finance, insurance. I'm only warming up. There are so many potential pieces to this picture. And I just think that mosaic image is what I come back to, because I think it is important that to meet the scale, we have to think in that way, in my mind. Secondly, as you say, from an Irish perspective, and we hopefully, I think, in practice have borne this out in what we do as well as what we say, I think that we need to be first principle agreement, recognizing the current system it discriminates against the SIDS and the LDCs. It's not just that they need to be favored, but they are disfavored in the current allocation and all the mechanisms for a variety of different reasons. And I think that should be a first principle that we try and agree on, to prioritize the more vulnerable countries. Now we do that in our doing. What does Ireland do? We have a budget next week. It's a golden rule, you never announce a budget in advance. But there's a reasonable high, under 99% certainty, we will meet our commitment to double climate finance, some 225 million next year. It's 100% grant, like Jaime said in the Netherlands, it's 100% grant supported. It's about 80% of it goes to adaptation. Some of it may be a mixture of mitigation adaptation, but it's very much skewed towards adaptation. That's where we just have a culture of coming from for a variety of historical reasons, we're small, but we work in that area, so that's where we tend to be coming from. We need to work in collaboration, not just the adaptation connected to all and we have board members on the Loss and Damage Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the MDBs. So I think we need to use that mechanisms when we approach climate finance, is integrated with other international funds and boards and so on. I think what we see is we need to be really strong on the adaptation country platforms and support the delivery of those as well. It's direct support to governments. And I think, and working with what Trig said there, I think since March last year, we've been working with the US in supporting the principles around local funding support, so that it's not just governments, but that you get to the layer below that, so that it's very grassroots, it's led locally, and that principle of listening and learning from local knowledge is very important. And I'm speaking now as a minister. Listen, we all have this problem. We all have to develop our own national adaptation plans and deliver on our climate, all the various climate elements. We know in our own country that it's siloed and it doesn't take a whole of government approach. So I think similarly when it comes to adaptation finance, we need to be talking to the Treasury, not just the Environment Ministry. And we need it's in health, it's in education, it's in transport, it's in agriculture. And so I think, again, we should be specific and scientific in encouraging what we do in the adaptation finance to improve the quality, to make sure it is whole of government. It's not just the national adaptation plans, it's the NDCs, it's the national investment plans. That's how we make this work well. We do need to think about debt. And I think, again, we've been supporting, what does Ireland do? We're supporting the work, the review being led now by Colombia, Kenya, France, and Germany, I think, isn't it? In terms of report due to come and in terms of how do we manage that debt issue. And lastly, I'd say, I do think one of the things we do need to look at, not to what the lady from Belize said, not to just focus only on investment, but I do think there's real potential for investment in those areas where you get mitigation and adaptation, particularly in nature-based solutions, because it seems to me that tends to the local, that tends to support that brings a justice benefit as well as an adaptation and mitigation benefit. And so I think that's where, and that's in our country as much as any other. You tend to forget that the 200 million big project gets all the attention. The 20,000 into a farm or into a field, it gets less of, you don't get the front page for that. But I do think that's where we should be pushing as well. Sorry for going on for so long.
No, absolutely. And actually, yes, I mean, what you said it's really spot on. It's those local, smaller interventions that add up to make the bigger difference. So Honorable Tule Sule, I'm wondering if you need a prompt or would you like to respond to what you've been hearing?
She spent all night waiting for the prompt. So what do you want me to talk about?
Okay, no, I'll tell you. And if you still then want to respond to what you've been hearing, that's absolutely fine. So the prompt is, Samoa is an incredibly vulnerable country to climate change. And at the same time, it's an ambitious country which has submitted NDCs and NEPs. What is needed for ambitious countries like Samoa to be able to implement its ambitious plans, adapt to climate change, and increase resilience?
Okay, thank you. Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I think I'll go off script. Just based on the discussion, I want to highlight 2 points, and I think someone raised it in the previous, is the quality and the quantity. For us, as small island developing states, a lot has been raised in terms of the quantity, and when we talk about the NCQG, the doubling of our adaptation financing, a lot of this, none of this has happened. So we will continue to advocate for that to happen. And it's good to hear some more voices joining so that we ensure the doubling of adaptation financing does come to fruition. But more importantly, from my perspective, and I think a lot of our small island states, is the quality. We talk about the 332 billion into adaptation. I'll give you an example. Last 2 weeks ago, I went to open a World Bank funded adaptation project for our country. 6 million to build a school that is they use double up as a refugee camp during flooding. We could have actually built that because we'd put it in a NAP that we could build those schools at 500,000 or 400,000. 10 schools we could have built with that. That's the quality of the actual funding. When it's given as a MDB, as other sources, it means a lot of this funding we could have used a lot, we could have done a lot more in terms of adaptation. We built a seawall under the World Bank project, cost 5 million, 10 million. Actually, we could have built it using the resources and what we've planned, using our working within our national framework. We could have built 2 miles or 5 miles of that. And that's the quality that is needed in terms of when we talk about adaptation financing, actually utilize what we have developed ourselves. Don't come in and say, okay, we identified that you said you need to build a seawall. We will spend the next 3 years writing a proposal that we will bring 30% to 40% of the consultants from our countries to come and design that project. And then we will bring all the materials from our countries, import it to you, so you actually build a seawall that is of no use. By the time it comes to, it'll be of no use to us. We have when the USSG came to Samoa a couple of weeks ago, I went and showed them. We have a seawall that's been built 4 times over the last 20 years, because every time it's built, we have a new cyclone. Rebuilt, a new flooding. So these are the types of things that we have to deal with on a daily basis. When we talk about in terms of approaching, or we've tried to do it ourselves. So, and this is I'm looking at here in terms of what you call it, blended financing, new financing approaches. We've tried to we're developing what we call a Samoa Care app. And that is, when the last time we talked with him is about airline tax. And this is we're going to launch. So anyone that you fly, you can go on our app, and if rather than giving to Emirates or in New Zealand or other airlines, you can actually use your carbon offset and give $10 or $20. And if I look around here, if we had that app and everyone here would add to that, we can build a seawall next week, not have to wait 5 years to build that seawall. So these are simple mechanisms that for us would be very useful, and it's according to what our needs are. There's a couple of other mechanisms, but I think the other issue that I also want to highlight is there's a lot of bilateral aid. We're working through that. But there's a lot of foundations that, from our standpoint as government, they're getting more money in terms of adaptation. We have different foundations that can't work with the government. In our small island developing countries, we're creating NGOs because that's the only way that the NGO money can flow into helping our countries. But most of the work is with the government. And it's a lot cheaper to do it with government. So there has to be a mechanism to enable these big foundations, to be able to support the small island developing country governments to do the work, rather than creating new infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Alessandro Guerri, are you going to go off script? Do you want the prompt? So the G7 recently launched the Adaptation Accelerator Hub. How can this hub be used to help close the adaptation financing gap? And how can this help scale up existing efforts and initiatives?
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure being here speaking in front of you. As last speaker, I will try to bring some good news today. When you talk to an Italian, try to explain how adaptation is key. It's a common sense, because we tried in our national policy. How big is the cost avoiding investing with an ex-ante principle rather than ex-post to remediate to damages? So we have a huge experience on this. I could mention maybe the most iconic city in the world affected by climate change, that is Venice. And nowadays Venice is protected. And then taking all the tips from previous fora like this, we built, as the Italian G7 presidency, this initiative called G7 Adaptation Accelerator Hub. It's here today with me, Federica Fricano, that I think many of you knows, also to testify our commitment. This initiative was thought by her. And I would like to raise awareness on how much as Italian G7 presidency, we selected it as the core initiative of Italy in the climate action field. And the purpose of this initiative is to the compass is the country-driven approach, but then really realistic, going forward faster and with a quality approach from adaptation plan to adaptation strategy, drafting bankable project and ready for purpose. And to be ready for purpose, we aim to bring to the table from the beginning multilateral development bank, climate funds, and financial key actors. Another proof of the selfless approach of the Italian policy on climate, very pushed by our Prime Minister, is that we selected, and the other partners agreed on that, UNDP as a supporting agency and not a G7 steering committee, but to rely on the UNDP structure to support and to make real this G7 adaptation hub. So I'm here today to say that you can count on Italy within the COP29, especially to make clear how adaptation is key. That is maybe more difficult and more expensive than mitigation. But maybe when you talk of island, it's any kind of activity, both mitigation and adaptation, is difficult to put in place. So to be able to not left someone behind, we are ready to support and to highlight how adaptation gap should be filled. So you can count on Italy, and we hope we can count on you supporting this initiative on adaptation that I could say take together all what we heard today. And so thank you. And
thank you. So I think we've got some time. Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. So I'd like to open the floor again now for if anybody wants to reflect on what they've heard.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the representative from Samoa for basically saying everything that we've been trying to say for a long time. My name is Valeria Ramundo Orlando. We have a climate adaptation fund, so I'm here to represent the private sector. We are private equity investors, and we believe that our investments have to stay in country for the duration. Not only that, we also believe that as we invest in climate adaptation means that we're investing in the company's upskilling of their capacities to teach them how to build resilience, to build your seawall, to build floodgates, to build coverage for heat resilience. Resilience and adaptations are very complicated. And what we found is that there is a lot of institutional investors and investors that are here this week who are interested in investing in climate adaptation. The issue is DFIs are too slow. No offense to DFC, or to the EIB, but taking over 12 months to do an assessment of an opportunity in adaptation, that's not going to work. There's one thing that you've mentioned, and I'd like you to tell us more. How can we bring partnerships to SIDS, to islands? I completely agree. We used to do green bonds in 2016, 17, 18, so a long time ago. And mitigation, we started in 2008. So today it is really the time of opportunity for finance and adaptation. But nations need a stronger NAP. They need to have a priority list that identifies those projects where private credit, where private equity can come in and support the nation and support those projects. But the most important thing, and this is a limiting factor that nations can put, is to leave the capacity behind. We are not bringing in the expertise from the West and then taking it away. There has to be an intention to leave the expertise locally so that the use of proceeds of bonds can actually be deployed and that those companies can start growing also at a regional level to build more adaptation programs. What I wanted to say, you're on the right track. We're out there. We're just harder to find because we never get invited anywhere. But other than that, we move fast, so your seawall can be built in just a few months. Thank you.
That's great news. Yeah, Una Mays has a mic.
Thank you. Anand Patwardhan from the University of Maryland and the Adaptation Research Alliance. I think I want to follow on the previous comment and just make a shout out to the fact that in the long run, building that capacity and the linkages between local knowledge institutions and actors doing implementation is really critical. We want to build that expertise. And the other point I wanted to raise is, Nicola talked earlier about this idea of climate proofing. And I'd like us to think a little bit not just of how to make investments more climate proof, so resilience of investments, but resilience through investments. So what, not just how we make infrastructure more resilient to climate change, but is that infrastructure going to advance the resilience of communities dependent on it? And I think if you think in that way, automatically the idea of nature-based solutions becomes much more compelling because you're really trying to build, you're trying to think about what is it that you're investing in, not just making it more climate proof. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear about all the interest in adaptation. But let's be sure that we don't want to create more debt for small island developing states. Fully endorse what Minister Schuster has said about, let's just use what's local. One thing I don't hear in this conversation about how we expand is fossil fuel subsidies. Why aren't we talking about that? Thanks.
I want to respond to that. There's a group of countries that actually are signing a statement on fossil fuel subsidies, and I'm trying to get Brazil on board and others as well, to get clarity. We realize in the Netherlands we have 40 billion or more than 40 billion euros per year that we're pumping into the old economy, and it was not indirect subsidies. 50% is materials, 50% of that, or the other half is fuels, and then the other half of the fuels is again international agreements, aviation and shipping. But at least having transparency now gives us the opportunity to make policy decisions and to reallocate inefficient subsidies towards where we actually want the economy to go. So I'm really a shout out to everybody to really focus on subsidies as existing funding that can be redistributed towards mitigation and adaptation. Thank you.
Yeah, would the panel
well,
like to
as European countries, we are well inside European legal framework that really look forward to improve in addressing finance to sustainable sources rather than fossil fuels. And I totally agree with that.
We leave Cedric with the last word. Can I again respond to the lady from Belize, which I think is a very good question? And can I say, the answer, I suppose, is all about politics. Because we know, I was talking to someone yesterday in a country where they've been really brave in a difficult circumstances in removing fossil fuel subsidies, because in the end it's the right thing to do to the country. But how do you get re-elected? It's simple. We are in a sprint and a marathon. And you could apply that, like I mentioned the word tax there, like confetti at a wedding. How do you get re-elected with that three-letter word ending in X being, in the center of the debate? And that's our challenge, whether it's on the subsidy side or raising the finance side. It is the real critical thing is winning public confidence in the direction we're taking, that this direction towards justice, bending, I think, as you said, with Martin Luther King's the course of evolution bends towards the just. How do people have confidence in us in that, in politics, to do what we need to do here, to raise the scale of finance and also to lower the fossil fuel subsidies, which is politically difficult. And it's the story. That's why I go back to the words we use, or the mosaic, or whatever word it is. It's to inspire people with the vision that this is doable, and we can, and people to vote for it in the end. Or even in countries where, whatever the governing system, it's still the same challenge. That's the challenge.
We have a couple more comments also from the floor, but let Cedric speak first. Yeah.
Just on the access question, we're here. And I'll talk to you, and we can go build our seawall next week and any other. And I agree with you that for us as well, we never get to sit around investors that are interested in supporting some of the work that we do. I don't know why. We've just been in different areas, but it's a start. I also want to add that we developed our adaptation plan in 1999, which has integrated our agriculture, health, everything, as what the Kyoto Protocol and all those other conventions, UNFCCC said. Probably 5% of those have been implemented. We developed a coastal infrastructure management plan for the whole country, consulted with every of the 200,000 people in our population in every district. Those have not been implemented because there's no funding support. And lots of those are an adaptation, relocation, creating an infrastructure to allow people to adapt. We've been asked again to develop NAPs in this Paris Agreement. We're tired of developing plans that don't get implemented. And when we talk about getting elected, our constituents are tired of us coming to them and saying, okay, we just got to have this new plan. And they show us the plans that we've developed many years ago, and they haven't been implemented. So it is a issue for us as well to getting reelected, is to have being able to do that. In terms of climate proofing, it's a good example of I wrote the climate proofing paper for water sector for Samoa. And part of that is the EU, and I want to give a shout out to the EU, because instead of supporting part of our ACP EU funding, they've agreed with us that the funding that comes to Samoa is to support our water sector through budget support. So it's not that no one is developing, it's utilizing our national plans, and it's implementing at our cost. So we're able to implement more in terms of climate proofing of our water sector. And this is a mechanism that we, as small island developing states, much preferred than having a long-term planning systems. Thank you.
Yeah, we're.
So I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can't take any more because we have closing speeches. But please stay. The room will be here, and we're so excited that you want to discuss more. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to invite Anatoni. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So I'd like to invite Anatoni and Jonas Feisago-Nwadecker. Anatoni is the National Secretary for the Climate Change Ministry of Environment for Brazil. And Jonas is the Secretary General of Dan Church Aid, the Danish Church Aid. And they'll be doing some closing remarks for us. I'll then just, and then I'll close off at 10, hopefully. So if I can ask Anna to start with a close, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Really good to be here. So thank you very much for inviting us. I think we all realize that as we talk, we have flooding in Italy, we have wildfires in Brazil, we have droughts in many countries. So as we discussing where the money is going to come from, people are adapting because they have no choice. So this is already happening. The impact of climate change has come much faster than we all wanted or expected. The impact of climate change has come much stronger, and really is as if we all surprised by that, because I think we obviously don't know was the intensity that will be coming. And we have seen that my country, Brazil, we're spending a lot of money already on adaptation. Every country is spending money on adaptation. Every community is spending money on adaptation. And nobody is really just waiting for international finance to come and help us. But because obviously we need to adapt. But obviously we need more international finance to help those people. We spend a lot of time, and I've been working on climate for more years than I should say, on talking about mitigation finance. Mitigation finance, if I don't mitigate in Brazil, a Chinese person or an American or a Danish person will have the impact of my mitigation in Brazil. But adaptation is different. If I don't adapt in Brazil, who cares? If Samoa doesn't adapt, who cares? So we really need to put adaptation on the spot because it's a moral obligation that we all have on helping each other on adapting. So it's not just a question on mitigation. We need to do because we are linked. But on adaptation, what links us is a moral obligation. And I think we need to be conscious about that all the time. So as G20 presidency that Brazil has, what have we done for adaptation? First, at the Sharper's track, we highlighted adaptation as a key, adaptation finance as the key topic for the working group on environment and climate. That was the first time, I think, that adaptation finance has been highlighted as a key topic there, just a whole working group for that, and has been a really interesting debate that we have in on G20, both about the public money that's needed, the public money that's already been spent by developing countries and least developed countries, and obviously the public money that needs to come from north to south. But we're also talking about how can we mobilize private sector, even if within our own countries, because it's clear that the private sector is also being affected by climate change, and they're also investing, but they haven't seen yet the opportunity. So that's one thing that we've done. We obviously brought to the G20 the reform of the financial system, the reform of the MDBs, and how MDBs and the finance system will help on adaptation. So that's very much alive there. And we have, for the first time, a task force, a global task force on climate change. There's two task forces in the Brazil G20, one on combating poverty and the other one on combating climate. And on that task force that we're working together with many friends here, we put together for the first time central banks, finance ministers, climate ministers, and foreign affairs ministers to say how we're going to deal with this big challenge that we all have. And it has been a very interesting journey this last year, because it's really, really hard to talk with our central banks on the risk of climate change and the need for us to work on adaptation, because of cost of inaction is so much higher than cost of action. But central banks tell us it's very hard to calculate that risk. How we calculating the risk, and therefore it's so hard. And when I say central banks from all countries, if there is one thing that they agree in all G20, from Russia to the US to China or now Brazil, is that central banks, they are doing their part on the disclosure, but calculating the risk of climate change, the risk of adaptation, is still something that we needed to work together in a much in a faster way. Another thing that we're doing on the G20, we're working on the country platforms, JETPs and country platforms, and we are putting adaptation at the center of country platforms. Brazil will launch a country platform now in Washington at the last meeting of the G20 Climate Task Force, and we put in adaptation there at the center. And I think all countries now will need to put adaptation at the center of whatever country platform that they want. But finally, for COP29, our colleagues from Azerbaijan, we're working very close on Troika. We had meetings about adaptation finance through Troika, and it's clear that on the NCQG, adaptation will be a key issue for all of us. And for COP30, the goals of adaptation, the indicators of adaptation comes to COP30, as you all know. So adaptation will be a very, very important issue for Brazil. You can wait, because we wanted to put that and highlight, just because we're suffering so much, everybody's suffering, and we feel that needs some impact. And finally, just to say, President Lula, very concerned about, as I said, the moral gap that's happening, the ethical gap that's happening. He announced yesterday or the day before on the Future Summit that Brazil, for COP30, together with the United Nations, will launch a global stock taking for moral and ethics related to climate. We just had a global stock take related to mitigations gap. What we felt that we really need to set the scene for COP30 is also to do a global stock taking on moral and ethics and put adaptation in the center of it. So invite everybody to be part. Thank you so much.
So my name is Jonas. I'm the Secretary General for Dan Church Aid, who is one of the organizers. Really, I've been asked just to close this meeting and say thank you to everybody. So Your Royal Highness, honorable speakers, excellencies, ambassadors, panelists, participants here in New York, and participants online also. What an exciting morning. It was full of energy. It's good, direct, also quite honest discussions and valuable recommendations and shout-outs and call for actions. And I found a degree of matchmaking. So I hope you enjoyed the morning just as much as I have. So did we achieve at this meeting? Did we manage to create the momentum that we were set out to achieve? What we have heard is, in the opening statement, and also very concretely from Malawi to Holland to Samoa, climate change is already impacting people, communities, and economies around the world. It's threatening security, economic and human development, food systems, public health, and ecosystems everywhere. And many countries have called on more adaptation finance to be made available to support developing countries, especially the most vulnerable, in their adaptation efforts in line with their existing needs. There is a need to increase the political support for adaptation, and countries need to come together to ensure COP19 and beyond deliver scaled-up finance and action on adaptation. So in the room today, I heard a recognition and an agreement across all speakers and panelists that COP19 is the place to continue the discussion and build the necessary trust so that we find a way to close the adaptation ambition. I also heard that there are already some initiatives such as the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action or the Adaptation Accelerator Hub that could potentially deliver at scale, provided the right level and types of funding is made available, and that country and locally led quality adaptation projects are actually there. So allow me just to remind all that at the COP29, parties need to demonstrate that they are not forgotten their previous commitments on adaptation. Now they must demonstrate how to implement them. And to reiterate what several have mentioned, adaptation finance must be enhanced, it must be scaled, and it must be made accessible to meet the growing needs, particularly of developing countries. So really, on behalf of all the organizers, the South-South-North, the E3G, the UN Foundation, the German Watch, and Dan Church, I really do want to thank everybody who took part and set aside 2 hours of your valuable times to engage in this high-level roundtable. So thank you very much, and I wish you a great day.